and I am currently in fourth semester, and one semester left and I'm graduating. And okay, so to introduce ourselves, we want to know the name, major, year, and where in the Philippines our family originated. Like, yeah, okay. So yeah, Christine, and my family is originally from Pangasinan. It's in the up north, Ilocos region. But I was born and raised in Laguna, which is in southern Tagalog, southern part of the Philippines. And yeah, that's Mia. And who wants to go next?
I can go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Nap. He, him, they, them pronouns. Question. I've been, as I mentioned earlier, like 9 years out of undergrad. Transplant from California. I'm based in Dallas, just visiting here. Yeah, my family, I'm an immigrant. I'm from Las Piñas, Metro Manila. Anybody here is Manileño? Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's it.
I'll go. My name is Frances. I use she and they pronouns. I am 1 year graduated from college. I went to school up in Boston, and I'm now working in East Austin at the Carver Museum. And born and raised here in the States. I'm mixed, but my mom's family is from the Zambales region and the Batangas region.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy. I also moved to Texas from California a year ago. Been out of college for almost 9 years also. I did major in environmental engineering, but working now as a data engineer. Yeah, and my family is from Pampanga. I also was raised in moved here when I was 15.
Hi, I'm Robert. I use they, he, and she. My major is English. I'm a first year, and my dad's from Missouri, but my mom is from Nugget City in Deepwood. So, yeah. And I was born and raised in Texas.
Hi, my name is DJ. I'm a senior. I go to ACC for physical therapy. I've pretty much been born and raised in, not born, but raised in Texas, and I'm from Metro Manila.
Hi, my name is Juliana. I'm a third year design major here. My pronouns are she, her. My dad is from Bulacan, and then my mom is from Makati. So I was born in Manila, and then I lived in Makati for 4 years.
My name is Kareem. I'm a third year film major. And I was born here in Texas. My dad's from Vietnam, and my mom's from like Manila area, but that's not that.
I can go next. Hi guys, I'm Ben. I'm a second year biology major here at UP. I use he, him pronouns, and then my dad's side is from Batangas, and my mom is from Kalinga, which is northern Luzon, the mountain province area. But I was born and raised here in Texas.
Hi, my name is Jara. I am in fourth year majoring in psychology. I use she, her pronouns. My family's from Parañaque, which is like also in the Manila area. And then my dad's from the province, like Oriental Mindoro. And I'm also an immigrant and a here.
Okay, Hi guys, my name is Brennan Rodriguez. I am a second year here at UT studying international relations on the pre-med track. I use he, him, they, them pronouns, and my parents are, my father is from Bulacan. My mother is from Rojas City, and that's near like Iloilo. So like she speaks Visaya. I was born and raised in California for 5 years, moved to Texas for the rest. And yeah, I'm excited to meet all of you.
Hi, I'm Ishbel, second year speech language and hearing major. I was born in Saudi Arabia, but both my parents are from Cebu.
My name is Lance Velasquez. My pronouns are he, him. My dad's side is from Fil-Am, and my mom's side from Batangas. I was born in Manila, but I was raised mainly in the Caribbean. And I'm here as an international student majoring in medical science.
Okay, hi, I'm Cheska. I'm a first year majoring in radio, television, film. I'm mixed, but both of my parents were born and raised in the Philippines. My dad is from Manila and my mom is from Bicol. And I was born and raised here in Texas.
I'm Martina. I'm a public health major freshman year, and I'm from Texas, but I'm not Filipino.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leon. I'm not Filipino. My pronouns are he, them, and I major in biomedical engineering.
My name is Izzy, she, her. I'm a first year public health med major. I'm mixed, so my dad is white, he was born in the States, and my mom was born in the metro area, but her grandfather grew up in the Batangas. And I was born in New Jersey, and I moved here in 2010.
Hello, I'm Claire. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a first year psychology student here. I'm also mixed, so my dad grew up here, but my mom is from, I believe, the Comcast region. That's my sister.
Okay. My name is John Paul. I'm a third year physics and astronomy major. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm also not Filipino. I'm actually full Vietnamese American. Both my parents are immigrants from Vietnam.
Okay, so welcome everyone, and we're so happy to see you here. And to start the discussion, I would like to ask two questions from you, and anyone can share whatever they want to. So first is, what do we know about the Filipino-American history? Do you all have any thoughts about the Filipino-American history? Anyone wants to share?
I'm aware that during the Spanish conquisition that the United States wanted to offer help or promote Filipino independence, but then there was some discrepancy because they sort of low-key wanted to colonize them. During that whole conflict, they also influenced a lot of Filipino culture, as evident through the fact that we speak a lot of Tagalog in the Philippines, and we also teach English in Filipino education. And one time I went to this, I don't know if it's Quezon, but it's where Zubik is. But that was where the military base was for the United States, and a lot of the road systems, a few in the Philippines was fashioned over the grid system, which originated from the United States. But ever since then, especially World War II, especially with Pearl Harbor, we've been, I think that link, that camaraderie link between the United States and Philippines was really solidified through allyship and war. And since then, that's how influx of immigration and whatnot, and also supply of nurses from the Philippines is very big.
Yeah, you're right. So I was born and raised in the Philippines and moved here in 2018. And I studied in a Catholic private school. And yeah, so most of our subjects we were using English. Only for Filipino and I think history we use Tagalog. So that's something that to think about. We're in the Philippines, but we're not using Tagalog as our language. Yeah, so you're right about the base in Subic. Yeah, there's a big base there. Share about what they know. It's okay if you don't know, if you still don't know, and you're trying to figure out what's the history of Filipino Americans, and so yeah, since does anyone want to share, or
I guess I have a personal anecdote. I just feel growing up, you learn a lot about U.S. history, and when it comes to the Filipino-American War, it's very brief. And I just have this memory from my high school U.S. history class. We were learning about the Filipino-American War, and I know my teacher was definitely pushing that idea that the Philippines got their independence from Spain, and then they weren't ready to be a country yet. So we were helping them. So that's why we took them up there. That was just a personal anecdote that I haven't learned much
Mhm. Yeah, so like what we watched a while ago, they said that the US gave independence to the Philippines, but you know that that is not true. Um, I believe we're gonna talk about it later. So yeah. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask you a question like what do you want to know about the Filipino-American history? Do you have like a specific question in mind or like something that you want to know?
Like Filipino history or Filipino American?
Filipino-American history.
Or even Philippine
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, just
Because-
Philippine history. Better.
I feel like living here in the States, we were just told that it was one perspective and one perspective only. So, yeah, the truth
Yeah.
What?
of what actually happened.
Yeah, I agree because I feel like Filipino Americans have played such a large role in many things that we learn about in school. But school is just so whitewashed that we only learn about the white key players instead of the people of color and indigenous and black people who were really within like the events that happened. Like even with like wars and like the Buffalo Soldiers, like they only teach that because they have to. Like, you know, they don't want to mention it, but it's mentioned just because they were such a large part of it. Like it's hard to ignore. And like the US system doesn't want to seem racist or anything. That would be crazy. So I feel like I agree. Like I want to know what actually happened. Or like how big a role did we play? And like why, because history is taught, when history is taught, it means the history behind that group or the history of that group. Teaching the history means it's balance. Like when you teach history, it's because there's value behind it and there's importance behind it. So why is essentially the American school system saying that our history is invaluable? And that's what I want.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And even in the Philippines, if we're studying like history, they're not like telling the truth. Even Filipinos, yeah, it's very on the side of the Americans. Like they would say that the Americans were the savior of the Philippines. So yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna know the truth.
All right, so I guess this workshop is about the truth, no? This is getting juicy, the discussion, which is great. It's very true, no? History, I think as Carice mentioned, when we value someone, you know, especially when we value a community, then it would just be right to tell their story, right? To tell accurately the history of a community. And unfortunately, it's 2021, and that's still what we're fighting for, which is very indicative of the state of this society, right? So yeah, that's why Filipino-American history is very important. The celebration, the fighting collective, we're fighting large scale and systematic erasure of the history of our people is very much still a task for all of us. You know? So, and for here, and as you can see, I think if you see let's go back to the title. So the title, From the West Coast to the Gulf Coast, the Significance of Filipino-American History in Texas. Filipino-American History Month, I believe, was only enacted as a thing starting 2009, is that correct? Yeah, right. So just a little over 10 years. It's the first federal effort to really put Filipino-American history on the map. So it's very new, right? And as a lot of you have said, when you studied Filipinos and Filipino-American history in K-12, we're only relegated to a few paragraphs, right? even how they framed the Philippine-American War, we were called the insurgents, right? Speaking to, I think someone said, like the manifest destiny. Who here has heard of President McKinley? So he was the one. Did you know that he had a dream that God visited him? Did you know that? So God supposedly visited him and told him it was a God-given message that he needed to take care of us, that we needed taking care of. Yeah, so I don't know what he was smoking, but yeah. Preview of the next steps. We do a lot. If you wanna sit down for a few hours to do another workshop on just a full-on Philippine history, we also do that. And we'll show you that those words that McKinley said. But before that, we let's get into this first. Why study Filipino-American history? If we want to study Filipino-American history, it'll take us the whole night. It can even take a semester to study the entire Filipino-American history. So, but for the next 20 minutes, we'll just get a glimpse, some highlights of Filipino-American history, just to get a reference. No, as you saw, for those who saw the video, Filipinos have been here technically since what, 1500s? Morro Bay, out in Central Coast, California, when the first Filipino ship crew landed on the Central Coast, right? So there's been multiple waves of migration of Filipinos to the US. At least 7 people count 7 waves. There's more now. Yeah, up to today. No, every day, more and more Filipinos come to Texas, to the US and to Texas in particular. Now, from the Philippines and from other parts of the world and other states as well. Now, so for now, let's try to focus on Carlos Bolosan. Who here has heard of Carlos Bolosan? Oh, whose first time is it to hear of Carlos Bolosan?
I think there was a video in the last episode. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's very new. No, so who is Carlos Bolosan? Carlos Bolosan was an immigrant when he moved here, born in 1913, and he was what, 17 when he moved to the US from Pangasinan. Anyone from Pangasinan? Any family members? All right. So yeah, he was 17 and he really worked along the West Coast, following the seasons, working in the canneries of Seattle, in Washington, and then working down the coast in California, picking asparagus, grapes, and at the same time organizing workers through union. So he was a very well-known leader of ILWU, or the International Longshore Workers Union. Throughout the time as a worker, he also documented the lives, triumphs, and hardships of Filipino migrants. So he is a very well-known poet. If you've heard, who here has heard of America is in the Heart? Okay, so we'll be passing out handouts later, by the way, things that you can do after this, books that you can read. These are very instructive books about the Filipino-American experience. What else? He was a poet. He made it to, his work was known or was made it to like a president's list. One day, do you know about that? The 4 freedoms. Okay, I'll get the exact information, but so he's up there, you know, among the American poets. Yeah. So yeah, a worker, an organizer, and a poet. Okay. Would anyone like to read this quote by Bolosan? Yeah, go ahead.
I came to know that in many ways it was a crime to be Filipino without work. I feel like a criminal running away from a crime I did not commit. And this crime is that I am Filipino.
Yeah, so this is in the 1930s. So, you know, being an immigrant and living through the experience of racism, you know, sadly, this is not far from what we are going through today, right? And shows how little society has essentially changed from then. And then this is from someone I work with. This is from Stephanie Drenka, who is a journalist up in Dallas, an organizer who gave this presentation a few months back at the height of the anti-Asian violence. She put together this online PowerPoint presentation, and I captured a few slides from that presentation, talking about the history of Filipinos in Texas. So just a few points here. It says in 1905, a Filipino houseboy about 12 years of age arrived with Captain J.A. Hewlin of the 33rd Regiment in Gainesville, Texas. Remarkably good looking with a bright black eye and an intelligent countenance. By 1910, the US Census counted 6 Filipinos in Texas, and by 1920, there were apparently 30 officially. By 1930, 246 females and 42 females. Okay, and then through the 50s and 60s, as some of you may know, professional Filipino nurses and doctors came here and settled in Texas. Who here has family member who settled around that time? Not yet. Okay. Yeah. And then 1948, the exchange visitor program paved the way for for professionals, including nurses, to come here on a temporary basis. And by the early 2000s, the number of Filipino and Filipino-American nurses working in Houston area, I'm not sure about 4,000. It may be more. That sounds too low. No. Yeah, and this is just a glimpse to show how even back then racial violence, layered with sexual violence, especially against Filipina women and Asian women, have been in existence way back then. No, and so we talk about anti-Asian violence against Asian women. We know that it has been going on for decades. No, as early as less than 10 years, about 10 years ago, the exploitation and oppression of Filipinos here in Texas is still around. This case is actually still very much present. This is actually what brought me and AV here as organizers, helping in supporting and empowering, organizing Filipino teachers who were trafficked in the Garland School District up in DFW. So essentially, over the course of 7 to 10 years, more than 300 teachers were brought here from all over Latin America and the Philippines. 70 teachers were brought in from the Philippines and were trafficked. They were promised green cards, promised jobs, and were extorted money to the tune of about $20,000 to be able to come here, supposedly to work. But then once they came here, there was no work. They had to fend for themselves. They were forced to live in a house that was also owned by someone related to the school superintendent, or to the human resources director rather. And so it went on for years and years. No, and when we went around and told the story of the teachers to other community members, including Filipinos in Houston, we found that this scheme, similar schemes have been happening to teachers even from decades ago. No, so similar form of exploitation and oppression, even among professionals, has been happening. And sadly, Filipinos are some of the most trafficked immigrants in the country, and it happens across different industries in nursing, education, hospitality, et cetera, et cetera.
If they
Quick
lied
question.
about providing work and then they brought them to Texas, what did they do? Like, are you implying like sex trafficking?
Oh no, sorry. This is labor trafficking. No.
So like, oh, like there were no jobs. Right?
Mhm.
So what were they exploiting them for?
Mainly for financial gain, because they were charged somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000 when there was no job guarantee here, and that's illegal. Yeah. So a lot of fraud, a lot of money making, et cetera, et cetera. No. So just to, so that's kind of the breadth, the scope of what Filipino Americans have endured, and a glimpse of what it looks like here in Texas. I'm sure you know your families, especially those that um, have grown up here in Texas, have a lot more to share with your experiences. And also when we talked about the Filipino-American National Historical Society in the earlier video, there's also a chapter here in Texas, actually in Houston, whose goal is to document the stories, anecdotes of our families. So yeah, so that's some major highlights. The next few slides, I would like to kind of pivot into what the fight for ethnic studies looks like. So 1968 was very pivotal in terms of fighting for Filipino-American history and also in ethnic studies. In 1968, different kind of like FSA. So imagine an FSA counterpart in California, in Northern California. At San Francisco State University, it was called PACE. It is still called PACE. It's the Filipino-American? Filipino. So Filipino-American Collegiate Endeavor. Basically, the FSA of San Francisco State University got together with the Black Student Union, with other organizations of other ethnicities, you know, to form the Third World Liberation Front. You know? What started off as a movement against the Vietnam War evolved to encompass advocating for other social issues until it became a fight for the establishment of ethnic studies. To this day, the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University is the first and currently the only College of Ethnic Studies in the country. Now, so right now the College of Ethnic Studies, you know, offers programs for us, for our communities to learn about our own history, you know, and offers a lot of programs and has benefited the community for the last few decades. Just want to show you a glimpse of what they fought for. Basically, it's very brief. No, but this started a movement that has benefited, that has made, a ripple effect within the Filipino community and other communities as well. Would anyone like to read? Yeah.
We, the Filipino-American students of San Francisco State College, support these demands made by the Third World Liberation Front. We, the Filipinos, have come to the realization, along with our Third World brothers, that the struggle for self-determination is the struggle of all Third World people, that a neutrality which, for the most part, kept our community from progressing in this racist society, cannot be tolerated or practiced any longer. There have been too many situations in which our people have denied to themselves the rights and opportunities to determine their future. There have been too many situations in which our people were given jobs as busboys, clerks, and janitors, even though they may have had college degrees. It is therefore evident to Filipinos at San Francisco State that racism is not only leveled at our Black brother, but at us as well. When we consider the prevailing inadequacies, small number of Filipinos in college opportunities denied to Filipino professionals in this country, exploitation of Filipino farm workers in Delano working for a few dollars a day. Seeing that these inadequacies should and must be eliminated for the betterment of our community, we demand. One, that there be established in the School of Ethnic Studies, the Department of Filipino Studies, and that within this department, individuals who comprise the Department of Filipino Studies will have complete control of its business, including faculty practices and course material. Two, that the college fulfill their contract by filling the unused slots in the special admission program with an agreeable number of Filipino students for the community in the spring of '68. Three, that any Filipino who desires to go to college would be admitted in the fall of 1969.
Yeah, and to give context, San Francisco, I'm not sure the exact statistics, but it had a very high concentration of Filipinos back then. With people, the historical neighborhoods where Filipinos have lived, Filipinos currently are getting pushed out, are getting priced out because of the very expensive housing out there. But yeah, there's a lot here. Who here has heard of, as you can see there, farm workers in Delano? Has anybody heard of them? No? Okay, so that's a whole other thing that we need to learn about. Quick fun fact, the workers in Delano, Filipino farm workers, who here, you probably know Cesar Chavez? Yeah? Did you know that the grape strike that Cesar Chavez led was actually led by a Filipino? Yeah, so in case you didn't know, it was Larry Itliong, Philip Vera Cruz. So it was Filipino manongs that actually first initiated that, and invited Mexicans, Japanese farmers to join forces, basically, and that the grape strike of 1965 eventually paved the way for better labor practices, not just in California but throughout the U.S. So that's one very concrete contribution of Filipino Americans to the U.S. But yeah, so there's this. So I think some of you have already alluded to this. Many of you want to know Philippine history. It is Filipino-American History Month, but a lot of you want to know Philippine history, which is very valid, because what is a Filipino-American history? It is not just the history of, we cannot remove the history of Filipino-Americans from the history of our people back home, right? They're very much intertwined. Filipino-American history is very much a living, breathing history. We live it now. One thing that I hope we take away from tonight is that we are living parts of history. We are active agents in history making. But yeah, so just want to show, hopefully this is accurate. This is after years of research. No, I'm just kidding. I just put this together today. Kind of makes sense, right? So when we talk about Filipino-American history, we cannot just talk about ourselves. We cannot just talk about Filipinos and Filipino-Americans. We also need to talk about Black history, Native American history, whose land we live on right now. Buffalo soldiers, David Fagan, so all that. The racism that Filipinos still receive and endure this day is very much because of the very strong anti-Black racism that this country unfortunately has been founded on, right? So yeah, so just FYI. So why study our history? So here in not FSA, but UT, what's the closest to Filipino studies there is?
There's Asian studies, and then under like international relations, you choose a track which is like not as intense as Asian studies. I mean Asian studies, but like specialization.
Oh, okay. Southeast Asian studies?
No, it's just
nothing.
Asian.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what about, imagine a future where UT offers Filipino studies or Philippine studies or Tagalog classes,
I'm the professor.
Yeah, we need professors, Filipino professors. Anyway, just some food for thought. Why do we study our history? Someone said before, if a society truly values a community, a person, a people, then it would give an appropriate amount of time for a whole society to learn about that community, right? Unfortunately, that's what's not happening, and that's one big source of racism, overt and covert, right? Where people are dehumanized, where they are not given the importance that they deserve. Our narratives are not being told alongside the erasure of the narratives of other communities. So that's why representation is important. I know some of you, I didn't grow up here in the US, but for Filipino Americans, I constantly hear, growing up, not seeing someone who looks like you, who represents your culture and ideas, etc. Right? So representation is important. It humanizes our community. It highlights our contributions to this society, economically, politically, culturally, etc., etc. And then interconnectedness. Just want to share, learning about our history also makes us learn about the histories of other communities and makes us realize what it takes for society to move. That history is not just because of some people deciding to sign a law or whatever. That it makes us see the larger picture, what it takes to what it has taken to make change in society at large, social movements, etc., etc. Have you? So there's this. No history, no self. No history, no self.
Wow.
Wow. Mind blown, right? Take a picture. Go ahead. IG worthy. But yeah, no, which kind of makes sense, right? If you don't, Jose Rizal once said, kung hindi mo, ano yun? Jose Rizal, the Philippine national hero, once said, kung hindi mo alam ang iyong pinanggalingan, hindi ka makakarating sa iyong patutunguhan. If you don't know where you came from, then you don't know it's hard to figure out where you're headed. Boom, mic drop. Right? So it's like this, that's why it's important to ground ourselves where our people came from, so we know where we're going, as individuals and as a community. So some of you may have thought of this, but just maybe something to think about some more after this. What does it mean then to learn about our history? You know, it could be for ourselves individually, for self-improvement, self-empowerment, even professional development. Knowing our own history could help us be better lawyers, doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, artists, whatever. We can also learn from our history about how to find a solution to current issues that we are facing, our local communities and our larger communities. And hopefully from here, once you leave this room, I hope that you are also lastly empowered to think that you are part of history. History is not something stagnant and that you just learn from the book and then move on. You know, you can be part of it if you choose to. You know, so yeah, I think that's it. Now it's Frances's turn.
Yay.
Okay. Oh, the lights are going on. Okay. All right. Hi, y'all. I'm Frances. Thank you, Nap, for educating us all. I know that there's a lot of stuff that we covered that, you know, are really things that are missing from our education. So I wanted to start out with a few questions asking y'all. The first question, and feel free to raise your hand to just start talking if you have something to say, and we can popcorn around whatever y'all feel comfortable with. So my first question is there anything new that you learned today that, you know, struck you or surprised you that you didn't know before? I'm sure there's a lot, but anything.
And we were here before the white club.
Right. Well, we were brought, you know, the what was it, Morro Bay? They were brought over by the Spanish colonizers. So if you know about how Spanish was here before, you know, England, you know that they probably brought Filipinos over as well. Anything else?
We settled in Louisiana.
Louisiana, yeah. So there's, don't quote me on this. In my history, you know, it's been a while, but there are a lot of ties to the Cajun, Pidgin, indigenous, you know, mixed culture from that region. There are roots to the Filipino people who landed on that piece of land there.
So if you visit, it's called Saint Malo. There's a historical marker now there, which was installed in the last 2 years in Louisiana.
In the last 2 years?
Yeah, in the last 2 years. Again, because Louisiana back then was part of Spain at one point, right? So with the whole Spanish galleon in the 1700s, I think.
Anyone else? Is there anything that, you know, kind of surprised you that, or maybe, yeah.
I kind of more have a question. So
Yeah.
I saw earlier that like the US enacted this an act to bring more like Filipino nurses to the US. I was just wondering why so many chose like Texas and California as opposed to like other places in the country. Because like I have 2 nurses as parents and they kind of told me the same thing. I just never wondered why like they chose Texas in particular.
Answer?
I know one factor in that is because the large employers, the big employers are based here, like Baylor Scott and White. So Baylor Scott and White, I've heard stories of how Baylor Scott and White would fill up the biggest stadium in the Philippines with for a job fair. So that's one, like these huge corporations are based here. That's one, yeah, which continue today.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said about, you know, a pre-existing community. You go to the community where your people already exist, you know. Anyone else? Any other questions too are welcome.
Forget about your shirt.
This shirt is actually, what's the brand called? What?
Is it from
Bayani Art. Yeah, so this is like a Bay Area artist. My cousin got it for me.
I want to
But
just walk around the school.
It's such an empowering shirt. Bayani art, yeah, Bayani.
Again, right.
You want to write? Yeah. Who was it? Emilio Bonifacio who said this?
Oh, I didn't know.
Bonifacio? I believe this was Emilio Bonifacio who said this. But this was said during the Filipino-American War, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, if there are no other things, we can move on to the next question. Did you find it? Oh, I forgot to click. My bad. There we go. There we go. Yeah. So I have a couple more questions for y'all. So you mentioned having an Asian Studies department, right? Do you know if there are any classes within that department that teach anything related to Filipino history? And anyone else have taken a class?
One semester there was a class called like music in the Philippines. So it was like
Okay.
under Asian studies and like music.
Okay, I have another question. Do you know who it was taught by?
Yeah.
Was it a Filipino person?
Yes.
Okay, word. I was gonna, but you know, it's an important question, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not offered like this semester. I think it was offered like last spring. And I remember I downloaded the syllabus, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll do the reading. The class isn't offered anymore.
Probably one of few every so often that are offered. Just a personal anecdote, my school had the East Asian Studies. It wasn't Asian, it was East Asian specifically. And everyone in the department was white. Everyone who taught the classes was white. Right, and so, right? So, I mean, but you know, when I was in college, I was constantly thinking about my own history. And it was something that I was very much interested in. So, you know, have any of y'all ever been interested in learning about this or studying it perhaps? I mean, you downloaded the, you know, the syllabus, but it's, you know, one of the few classes offered. So yeah, anyone interested in this kind of thing?
I would say like for me, I'm a design major. So I mean, on top of learning about like history in general, I think learning about how to like merge different disciplines is really interesting. So there are like a few kind of like manifestos that have been written by like Filipino designers, and I'm trying to like probably learn more about decolonizing graphic design.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of about that too, and just from my personal experience, I studied design a bit, and you know, it's such an important part of education is being able to present it in a way. I mean, a lot of us over the summer learned through infographics on Instagram. I don't know if that was your experience, but that was mine as well. So yeah, design is very much important and a part of that because, you know, Filipinos aren't just STEM related majors, we're designers and artists too. Yeah, anyone else interested in studying film studies or ever thought about it or ever popped through your head a little bit? Maybe experienced a barrier to studying it?
Well, I was also raised outside the Philippines, just not in America. So I always felt slightly disconnected from my Filipino background. So not necessarily Fil-Am, but I mean, my parents would, I feel like they do a good job, but I couldn't.
Right, and when you know, like you said, when it's not something that's stressed in our general culture here in America or here in the States, it's not something that is important to, you know, immigrant families, you know, abroad. You had something to add?
Oh, well, like you said, I'm very whitewashed. So just learning more about Filipino culture and history, it would make me feel more connected to my Filipino root. And also when I was, because in the College of Liberal Arts, we're supposed to choose a language that we want to study, like a foreign language that we become proficient in. And since I didn't learn Tagalog, I wanted to choose Tagalog, but they didn't offer it.
It's not even on Duolingo. It's really difficult to learn our, you know, native language when if we don't have access to family members who don't teach it and we don't have access to, you know, systems that offer it. it's really difficult. I hear that. Did you have something to add too?
Yeah, just to bounce off of that, like growing up in the Filipino diaspora is pretty hard because, like, in some respects, the community that you do find is mostly really connected with, is either like really connected to their culture or they're whitewashed and they don't really want to talk about it because it's such like a fragile subject and a subject like that personally makes me really defensive about my roots because I'm half Filipino, half Vietnamese. So I don't really know much about either. And I feel like people expect me to be like trilingual or like answer these questions about both cultures, but I'm really disconnected from it. So like what a lot of people don't realize, even within the Filipino community, is that there's, and other communities as well, is that there's a huge range of like how connected you are to your culture, and all of that is completely valid. Like it's not your fault. Like this is what I'm learning as I'm getting older. Like it's not your fault for not learning the culture if it wasn't, if you weren't if it wasn't accessible to you. So it's like, so learning about Fil-Am history, it doesn't make you more or less Filipino necessarily, but it does make you feel more valued as a Filipino-American or as in the Filipino diaspora. And I think that's why this is so important.
No, but that was good.
Yeah. I have one thing that I want to mention. I want to ask y'all, like, if you did learn about your Filipino experience, identity, history at all growing up, I want to ask where you learned it from or how you learned it. Yeah.
So I was thankfully blessed to live in a community in Houston, and literally all of my neighbors were all from Cebu. So because of that, I grew up with the culture. So we would celebrate every single Christmas together or every single holiday together and stuff like that. So that was the way that I grew up about it. But speaking into history itself, we didn't really talk about the majority of like spending holidays and like embracing our culture as well. And also like not just within the neighborhood, but majority of my school itself was food.
Right. Anyone else growing up, was their experience the same, different?
So mine was different. So like I would sometimes go to like the end of town, but I lived in the more like white, like privileged area. So that's like I was very much surrounded by like Protestant white people, Republicans. And my only source of like Filipino culture was in my own household. And then we went to a church all the way inside Houston to experience our culture, and that's when we would do like Christmas, and then have like food together, eat Filipino food together, and speak the language with one another. But what was so unfortunate about that church was that we shared the building itself with like white people, and like we didn't even want to integrate ourselves, like that whole church. Like it used to be called the Asian American congregation. It was the Filipino congregation, but like we've had like initiatives to combine the communities. Like that's like, I mean, church, like it makes sense to like, we didn't even want to do that. Right. So like there's this, it's so like sad, disheartening to see like what lengths you have to do to experience like your culture, your diversity, so segregated.
Right, yeah, and that's what we're trying to make those connections today and do. I'm laughing because my sister and I like looked at each other knowingly because we had a very similar experience of going to white church and then going to Filipino masses and it being very divided. Yeah. Did anyone else want to add, where they got their knowledge from if they had the opportunity to learn growing up before college?
Well, when I was in Trinidad, which is like where I grew up 12 years of my life, there was like a Filipino association. It was super small. There was like 200 people. But that's like where we would celebrate like Christmas with them and like just have parties, like, and we have like Filipino talent night. So
yeah.
Smallest 200.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason I brought up this question is because there's a quote, and I'm trying to find it, but I can't. But Carlos Bolosan said in one of his writings that, the history was brought over by himself, and that history was shared with him from an elder. Do you know what I'm talking about? In one of his books, And it just struck me because it really is true that the history that we learned, it's very much an oral history. It's a history that wasn't written in books, because the books that were written about us were by Spaniards or other colonizers. So the history that we do know that is our own is the histories that were brought over by our family members and the people who came here to the States. And those are histories that are so varied across the board. Everyone had different experiences as Filipinos immigrating, you know? So yeah, another question, how do you think that this Fil-Am history is relevant to you and your family's experiences and your goals going forward from today?
Actually, it's kind of funny because my mom works for the Dallas Independent School District, and she actually went through like the teacher thing, because she studied in she went to TCU or TWU, and then she eventually joined DISD. She was a professor for a little bit, but yeah, she also works in like ESL. But she did so much, and she was even like an instructional coach, but she was very underpaid. And she actually got like with a group of like Filipino like teachers, because there were a lot in the district, and they like sued the district and they won.
Nice, a victory. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? You know what's important to you? If not, we can move on to our last question. What, if any, are arguments or I guess even obstacles have you heard preventing ethnic and Fil-Am studies from being taught in academic spaces like this? I'm sure we can all think of one that happened very recently that's not necessarily specific to Fil-Am studies, but to ethnic studies in general. You know what I'm talking about?
We're talking about BLM.
Oh, kind of. Critical race theory. Yeah, are y'all familiar with what's happening here in Texas? And
With
right?
the curriculum change.
Yeah. Is that affecting colleges like UT?
I think it's like primary.
It's
and secondary
only
education.
okay. Got it. But yeah, anyone like have any thoughts on that, about how that affects us? It's a broad question, but
It's such a broad question.
or
Restructure.
I mean, any thoughts on how the impact or obstacles against critical race theory, is connected to our connection to Fil-Am studies? Did that?
I mean, just in general, like, because I don't know, them viewing like critical race theory as something like almost villainous, I don't know, it just erases like everything. Like it just ignores the fact that there are like systems in place that have been around for years and years that are like oppressing minorities, including us as like Filipino Americans. So kind of not having that anymore is like really unfortunate, especially since it does mostly affect like K through 12, and that's where you really start like getting all these ideals ingrained in you. That's I feel like this is another thought, like not about critical race theory, but I feel like when it comes to ethnic or like more specific studies like Filipino-American history, I feel like part of the reason why they aren't, really encouraged is like I feel like it might have to do with like it's not very like commercialized. Like people might be like, oh well, what career can you do with this? Like how does it benefit our Catholic society? So I feel like that's also part of ethnic studies. Like people don't see the benefit.
Right.
Like to kind of piggyback off of that, maybe there's some reason, like especially in higher institutions, why they don't offer such studies is maybe like the university or some kind of higher institution doesn't want to invest funds to like create a department and like have so much resources where they know a lot of people won't choose that track just because it's not popular enough, even though it's needed. So it's like they don't want
It's
to
not
kind of
economically fruitful, like would not create like workers in the workforce with high salaries, and that's like further funding the school. I think like part of like to piggyback off of what they said, like and also with like the curriculum change and then how like it's not very popular in like higher education is that like it's sort of like trying to create a systematic ignorance within like the growth, like the rearing of children, because like whether we like it or not, this nation was built upon race. racism, and like it's that racism continues to flourish today in our workforce. And I feel like what they're trying to do is trying to convince like these kids without education, trying to take away the elements of like very pivotal like ethnic studies in our history, is trying to teach them that like, oh, this system was made for you, this system was made to give you opportunity, but in reality it's meant to exploit you.
Right. Wow, good points, y'all. Yeah, the system of capitalism needs people who know how to do the tasks that will continue to flourish it. And is Fil-Am studies going to do that necessarily? It's going to challenge that, exactly. And even just, you know, the issues within, I'm sure, all college campuses, mine especially, of hiring staff who were not white people to teach the history, to teach Africana studies, to teach Latin American studies, to teach Asian American studies, all of that. Like, investing money in staff of color is something that I think a lot of college campuses face. Yeah,
It's a very big statement, especially for UT, which is very,
yeah, it's something that as students we fought against when I was in school. And I think
you said you came from Massachusetts.
I'm from the Dallas area, but I went to school in Boston.
Harvard?
No, no, not Harvard. I have things to say. No, I'm joking. I went to Simmons University, very small women's college up in Boston. Yeah. Did anyone else have any other questions? I want to hand it over to AV, who's going to talk about why all of this is so important. Anyone else? All right. Go for it.
Thank you, Frances.
Thanks, Frances. All right, so now that we kind of discussed already, the importance of history, we're going to talk about just some concrete examples of how students in the past have actually fought so that they can study their own history in their schools. So we're just going to give a few examples. So this one is a campaign that we worked on in California back in 2013. It was called the Assembly Bill 123 campaign. So Assembly Bill 123 is a bill in California that was passed so that what Nap was discussing earlier, the Filipino contributions in the farm labor movement, like, how you all know Cesar Chavez, but, we don't really know about Philip Vera Cruz or Lara Itliong. So that history where the Filipino actually contributed to the labor history of this country is taught in schools, in elementary and in high school. So there was a group of different students, different organizations who came together to make sure that this bill passed in California. And what we did was we actually really studied, what it means to pass a bill to a law in California. So we were like, okay, so this was already like proposed in the Education Committee of the Assembly, and so it's going to go to Senate and the governor. So we kind of had to study that, legislative process of really how do we make it a requirement for California to teach our history in the schools. So besides discussing the legislative process, we also made sure that we are putting the word out there. So we put on different events, activities, so different cultural events. We put on different community discussions on why this bill is really important. And we even went to different schools to collect signatures. So we faxed thousands of signatures to state legislature to make sure that they know why it's important to the students. And besides that, putting on different events. So it was really a community effort where it was not just students, it was also even workers, different service institutions, different allies, even non-Filipinos, understanding why it's important. So we reached out to different organizations, and it was actually across the country, across the state. So in NorCal and in SoCal, there were AB 123 coalitions that were formed. And so that's just kind of one way of how students in the past have fought concretely, so that there will be a requirement in the school so that their history will actually be taught. Another way to things, while we're waiting for that law to pass in our schools, what can we do as students to actually learn our history, right? So we've also done different, we've been creative, how about, creating our own courses, our own trips, so that instead of taking a trip on Thanksgiving or spring break, we can actually learn our history. So we've also done that during college. So one example is an alternative spring break. So this is a group of Stanford students going to SF State, San Francisco State University, to learn about the history. And also this is with the Filipino mural. So this is just one of the photos of the trip. And through that trip, this was in 2011, I believe. So what we did was during winter semester, we taught the course about Philippine history, and then spring break,
we led the whole class to go to San Francisco, to Delano, to Central California, to LA to learn about the things that we learned throughout the course. So we visited different schools. So Bessie Carmichael School in San Francisco is one of the schools that teach Tagalog, in their school. And then we went to different historical places. And this was also a center in LA that was serving a Filipino community there. So just different ways to really learn your history, meet Filipino organizations, even though it's not a requirement in school. And in doing that trip, we also were able to integrate with caregivers and workers in San Francisco. We were working with, we met many students in San Francisco who were actually in a campaign during that time defending public education in California. Aside from that, making it a requirement to learn your history in school and doing the trips, another way to actually really learn our history, as we said, is actually, I know it's the pandemic right now, but there's different opportunities to go to the Philippines ourselves to actually really learn what's going on there. So some of the community organizations that we represent actually do immersion trips in the Philippines. So this is just one example. This is a medical mission that I participated in 2018, and so you don't need your degree to be able to volunteer. A lot of the people who I was able to join with in this trip were med school students or even undergrads who were still learning and were able to actually work with doctors in the Philippines to provide care for those who are in need there. It was in Visayas. We served around 1,000 people. So it was actually a surgical medical mission. So these things happen, annually. It was postponed because of the pandemic. So definitely these are things that we're going to be doing again in the future. So we hope, through FSA, we will reach out to you. And, if there's any interest to go to the Philippines to really learn what's going on there, you all are invited. So this is just some examples of immersion trips in the Philippines. And not just medical missions, but even learning from like the workers in the Philippines. So learning about what's going on with them. Also meeting students there who are also fighting for education. These are opportunities to really learn our history and current conditions of what the Filipino people are going through right now. So with that, those are just some examples. But in Texas, as Frances kind of said earlier, what's the state of ethnic studies in Texas? So if folks didn't know, ethnic studies actually in 2018, so late 2018, the State Board of Education in Texas approved Mexican-American studies as the first kind of ethnic studies in Texas. So that was in 2018. And then just last year, in April 2020, African-American studies were also approved, designed after a Dallas ISD curriculum. So those are more like the official, ethnic studies in Texas right now. So, as you said earlier, there's like Asian studies here, but definitely there's more work to be done in Texas in terms of, really officializing or institutionalizing the study of Asian American studies, the studies of Philippine studies. So there's more work to be done. So some of the things that, we can do after this workshop, if we are thinking of, now that I've learned all of this, what can we do as students, right? So just some recommendations is, of course, research, like find out past and ongoing efforts. So for example, the people who actually were leading the fight for Mexican-American studies were professors in UT here on this campus. So, if you can try to meet with them and see what were their experience like fighting for that, if you want to do the same thing, for Asian studies, for Philippine studies, definitely research and find out and meet other people and collaborate with them, dialogue with them, what were challenges, what were good things that you did to be able to really have this be required in Texas. So research, collaborate with other communities. As we said earlier, Filipino-American history is not just about our history, but also it's interconnected with other communities. And then while we're working on that, initiate our own courses and trips that we can, get our friends, our fellow students to join, to learn together. And if there's no resources in your schools, then, create spaces for study circles within FSA or among your friends. Join organizations. Many of the organizations that we represent are going to pass on the handout. Those organizations actually, do studies among their members. So you don't have to, to pay tuition to learn your history, but there's already organizations doing it for free. There's a membership fee, but still. So these are just ways for us to, be creative and to really find ways to learn our history. And from our own kind of community power. I think that's all for this part. Any questions or comments, I guess, from like the next steps or what we can do? Can I kind of oh yeah, sure. So maybe we can just kind of share a little bit about the organizations that are listed in the handout for people to. Okay, you want to introduce your organization? Oh yeah, Christine. Or you have any questions?
You want to be by yourself?
Okay, Christine.
You're right.
Oh, thank you.
You're gonna use my car and just.
Anak bayan.
All right, so you might be wondering who we are, who we represent. Well, on your on the flyer here, you'll see 3 logos representing 3 organizations. So we're gonna, in case anyone is interested, you know, so there's Anak Bayan, there's NAFCON or the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, and there's Malaya. Christine will explain what Anak Bayan is. Francis will talk about Malaya, and maybe we'll talk about NAFCON. So what is Anak Bayan?
Okay, so Anak Bayan is it is the most comprehensive national democratic mass organization for Filipino youth and students here in the US. So what we fight for are really a lot of like the conditions of the Filipino youth, the Philippines, and here the students. So yeah, we are composed of peasants, farmers, workers, youth, all youth, students in the Philippines, and yeah, basically every it's a multi-sectoral national democratic mass organizations of youth in the Philippines, and we also have it here in the US. So we have it like in different universities and colleges around the US. And we also have one here in Austin. So we have an Anak Bayan Austin, and we have one in Houston, which is the Anak Bayan Rice, Rice University. So, want to add to that? With Anak
Yeah,
Bayan?
so if here Anak Bayan in the US also works a lot with other movements, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, other movements for independence and liberation. So if you are looking to really learn how to become an activist, check out Anak Bayan, and Christine is the coordinator for Austin. Yeah.
So I think you can scan the QR code, and then you can learn more and sign up if you're interested. Thank you.
So about Malaya, I'm one of the coordinators, the one here in Austin. Malaya is another mass organization dedicated to fighting against fascism, imperialism, and the human rights violations that are happening in the Philippines, but mostly focusing on building solidarity here in the States for us Filipinos existing in the diaspora. So we have a bunch of different campaigns that we're working on, one of which is pushing for the PHRA to be passed, which is the Philippine Human Rights Act. And that's something that we are supporting so that we can remove the US, the effects of US imperialism over the Philippines. There's a lot of other things that we do as far as education and other campaigns to get people voting in the Philippines. But yeah, same thing. If you're interested in joining, scan that QR code. Malaya Movement Texas also, we have an Instagram, so feel free to follow us. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, as for NAFCON, so NAFCON stands for National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. So it's an alliance of different Filipino regions across this country. And we're the ones who actually do those surgical medical missions in the Philippines. When there's like typhoons in the Philippines, we also try to raise relief. So we do a lot of humanitarian projects in the Philippines, and also help Filipinos who are in need here in the US, for example, like the labor traffic teachers, is one of the campaigns that NAFCON helped with. So yeah, so if you want to, help Underbayans, definitely check out NAFCON Texas. I was with NAFCON Texas and Jera is also part of it. So yeah, they're also on Instagram.
Great. Are there last few questions or comments?
Which company, which one are you?
Company.
Organization.
Technically with NAFCON. Yeah. Oh, sorry. that didn't come out right. With Malaya, I mean. With Malaya. With Malaya.
Same thing, whatever.
I'm gonna end the recording.
End the recording.
Yeah, thanks again to FSA and to General for